All right, that's running. It's not quite level, but it's running.
Because you're gonna have that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, same thing as well when you create the person. Like I said, there's more on here that says relation. Only if you put the relation under person, because relation, you can go to family, one name, and then comes the company. I'm hoping we can go with the, help me narrow it down. But yeah, you can see what my confusion is.
Yeah.
The HTML, like I said,
Okay.
depends on how fancy you want to be.
Yeah, this will
This
work.
one do bare minimum, 12 minutes.
Hopefully that will work. Hopefully I'll be able to keep something together long enough to get these things up on the web. Some folks have already started the assignment. Thank you very much. The assignment is due this Sunday night, and it's due at 11:59 p.m. If your files are time-stamped before 11:59 p.m., everything's good. Even if you don't have it finished, even if you're not sure that it works, even if you're not sure that it's right, if your files are in before 11:59, we're all good. Sometimes, and depending on how my client workload is, it can be a couple of weeks. You guys know, you've been in my classes before, it can be weeks and weeks before I get around to actually looking at stuff. Sorry about that, and we'll try to turn this stuff around faster this quarter. But the deal is, if you got your stuff in on time, and I find something that is missing, and I kick it back to you and say, could you check this, could you do this differently, you won't lose any points.
So like what I was asking you on that tab, okay?
So really, your best bet is, no matter what you think you've got going, turn something in. Now the other side of it is, if you're late, even by a few minutes, that deal doesn't apply. If you turn your stuff in late, it is what it is, and I'll grade it, and it is what it is. And if you turn it in a day late, you automatically lose 2 points. If you turn it in 2 days late, you automatically lose 4 points. So this is just one of those weird things, those little weird rules that you've got going in this class that you've got to just play up. So turn it in early and we cut slack. Turn it in late and you are ground up by the machine and spit out on the other side. Why would I do such a thing? What a terribly inhumane way to run a classroom. Why would I do something like that?
Make you turn it in on time.
That's one of the reasons. Although that never seems to stop some people. Some people just turn stuff in late or not at all.
Businesses have deadlines?
Businesses have deadlines. And as a manager and as an employee, I learned it was more important to hit the deadline with something than it was to miss a deadline. The second thing here is management is a conversation. If you work for somebody, even if they're a jerk, it always works out better if you tell them what's going on. It always works out better. A manager who is uncertain, who doesn't know what's going on, is a dangerous, wounded animal. And you don't want those people signing your paychecks. Management, I don't know who's been a manager in this room. Yeah. The worst thing as a manager is when your manager comes to you and say, what's the situation? The worst thing is for you to say, I don't know. That is just dead. If you don't have an answer, then he looks bad, and his manager looks bad, and then she gets nervous, and then pretty soon the whole organization gets squirrely.
What's even worse is when you know more than your manager.
That's the difference.
You can finesse that. Make sure the sign-up sheet gets to that gentleman, please. So, if you turn your stuff in on time, even if something's missing, and we start a conversation, it's all good. It's all good. My job here really is to be a point dispensing machine. That's what I'm here for. The way you get points is by understanding the material and playing the game. And if you play the game, sooner or later you'll understand the material. That's how it works. I don't know if I've told you this story, I've told some of you this story. One of these classes a couple of quarters ago, I got a guy who came in here and he didn't know which end of a computer to type. He hadn't done this sort of thing before. And he got an A in the course. Some assignments he turned in 3 times. And the first one he turned in was horrible. It flew. In fact, he turned in one that basically said, I don't know what's going on. And he turned that in on time. But he got an A. I also have had several students in this course over the quarters who in our conversations in class really are the smartest person in the room. They really know what they're talking about. And they're intelligent, and they keep up on stuff, and they always have great conversations in the classroom. And they got Fs because they didn't turn in their assignments. You can't get a passing grade on quizzes and exams alone in this course. You gotta turn stuff in. I don't understand that second type of person. I just don't. Maybe they're in it for the experience of having a great classroom experience. And if that's true, then I hope they have a good time. I do. So I don't know, those of you who have been around school before know that this is the game. For those of you who are just starting out, this is the game. Learn how to play it well and you'll do well. And some of these skills will be transferable and you'll make a lot of money. At least you'll avoid a lot of pain. It's nice when those two things go together. Okay, in our last exciting episode, we were talking about databases. Somebody tell me what an entity is. An entity. What's an entity? You.
It's an object.
An object, yes. What's an object? Somebody else. If I'm trying to model something in a business, what's an entity? What's an object?
Person, place, or thing.
Okay, I have 2 things to do first.
Person, place, or thing.
Person, place, or thing. Very good. What was your answer?
Things we want to track.
Things you want to track. Both of those are correct. Anything you want to keep track of, whether it's a person, a place, sometimes it's just an imaginary thing. Like a claim, an insurance claim. What the heck is an insurance claim? Well, it's a request by a person that they were in an accident, they want some money. That's what they signed up for insurance for. That claim as an object never really exists. There's a form, there's a phone call, there's a piece of email perhaps, but that claim isn't a real thing. It's an idea, and it moves through a company, and you got to keep track of it. What is an attribute? Attribute. I don't know if we covered this last time.
Describe the entity.
It describes the entity. Yes, it's a characteristic of the entity. So if I'm the entity, what are some of my attributes?
You wear glasses.
I'm a who?
You wear glasses.
I wear glasses, so glasses is equal to true. What's an,
I see the thing.
pardon me?
You're a male.
I am ostensibly and apparently a male.
I guess glasses aren't an attribute. They are cheated.
I'm a what? I'm a teacher. Cool. Very good. Is my address an attribute? My home address an attribute?
Yes.
It could be. Could be. Could be. Is my, we'll see, I have a couple different degrees. Are my degrees attributes? They could be. What you'll find as you do analysis, business analysis, is you'll find that the border between an entity and an attribute is kind of fluid. Sometimes you can say, well, I am in, like, for example, is the name of the class I teach an attribute of me? It could be.
Could be, depending upon.
Could be. Now, why would we use this class, this section, as an object, as an entity? Why would we want to make it its own entity rather than an attribute of me? Any reason? When whimsical, just deciding one day, hey, let's make that an entity. Any idea?
You don't have redundant information that way, you could narrow the class down to students and context more. defined
Yeah,
aspects.
you're getting close to it. We can do things with entities. We can list them, we can sort them, we can connect them with other entities, we can do all sorts of things. Relational database entries, as you'll read in the material, are really set up to manipulate entities, figure out what's connected to what. So if we've got a thing called a class, or a section of a class, we might want to do other stuff with that. We might want to print out who else is in that class. We might want to find out, does anyone attend this class, or should we just cancel that and fire that guy? If it were just an attribute of me, it would have no connections to anything else in the universe. Its only connection would be to me. If it's an entity, if I'm tracking this section as its own entity, as its own object, then I can ask all sorts of other interesting questions. Like, who's in this section? What kind of grades do they get? Because you know, if everybody in this class gets a bad grade, whose fault is it?
Teacher.
Yeah.
So then under the entity of the class, the teacher technically would be an attribute.
No, because I want to track things about teachers too. So at this point, we've got two entities, and they've got a relationship. So in your assignment, we give you a bunch of data, and you have to make a decision. Well, what's an entity here? What's an attribute? And we'll actually, in the earlier assignments, we'll tell you, we'll use this, and this as your entities. And then everything else has to be an attribute. But when you're working as a business analyst, you've got to make this call for yourself. And it changes over time. When you first start figuring things out, you think, oh, okay, I'm starting with this guy. He's got a class, all right, I'll make it an attribute. We'll work it that way. And then later on, you learn more requirements, and oh, geez, I got to figure out a whole bunch of stuff about that class, so I better not keep that as an attribute of the teacher. I'll make it its own entity, and I'll continue from there. So, things may start out as attributes and end up as entities. We also talked about relationships. Someone pointed out that in the assignment, let me see, yes, sir.
There's a bug. You forgot the H.
Sure. Thank you. Relationship is having wine with your wife. Oh, that's okay, actually. Don't worry, I'll cut that out. There are three kinds of relationships that we are going to cover today. Anyone know what they are? Three kinds of relationships? I'll give you the first one. 1, 2, 1. Does this ring any bells?
One to many,
One to many.
and then many to many.
Is that relationship?
Many to many. Yep. You know, there's some people in the world, there's some tribes, there's some races of people that only have 3 numbers. They have 1, 2, and then they have many. We ask them, how many kids do you have? And they say many. And then they can name the kids. They know exactly who their kids are. They just don't care the numbers of them. This is called numeracy. And in fact, it's we've done tests on human brains, and human brains don't naturally understand numbers bigger than 3. You have to teach that to a child. What's interesting is human brains automatically understand logarithms. What the heck's a logarithm? It's the stuff you ignored when you took it in math in high school. But dogs understand logarithms, and I won't go into it now. So the other kind of person who only has 3 numbers are database analysts. And they have the number 0, the number 1, and the number many. Because as soon as I've got more than 1, I don't care how many I have. Doesn't matter to me whether it's 2 or 3, or whether it's 87. That's a hardware problem. As soon as I have to track more than 1, it's many. And the difference between 0 and 1 is that optionality thing we talked about. Remember we talked about optionality and cardinality. Okay. Cardinality is how many. Optionality is do I need one or not. Together they come into that 0, 1, or many. 0 or anything. How many do I need? So, for example, I'm allowed to teach up to 3 sections a quarter. I'm a part-time instructor. Actually, typically, a part-time instructor is only allowed 2 classes. Full-time instructors must carry 3. So, obviously, the number of sections that I can have is 0 to many. Because I still have a status as an employee of the PCC, even if I'm not teaching. If it's summer quarter, they tend to let all of the part-timers go, and the full-timers take the class. I don't get paid, but I'm still an employee. So the PCC database has me as a 1-to-many relation, or a 0-to-many actually, relationship between me and sections.
What's cardinality again?
How many?
Oh, okay.
And I meant to look up that question you had about the cardinal points of the compass. It's a very excellent question. I didn't look it up yet. There's got to be a connection there.
Okay, I get it, actually. It could be, it's like geography and then
Yeah.
computers, so.
And I'll bet there's a connection to why people up in the Catholic Church are called cardinals.
Oh,
No, there's got to be a connection. There's always a connection. Anyway, side note. Okay, attributes, entities. Yeah. Okay. So we talked about business rules. Business rule is, what is a business rule? Business rule. We hit the high water mark on Tuesday. Business rule is a simple statement that says what? Oh man, I'm very disappointed in myself. Clearly, I did not make an impression on you folks on Tuesday. A business rule. I'm going to write a business rule down.
A relationship between 2 objects?
Whoa, thank you! God, my life is complete now. Thank you very much. A business rule is a statement about the relationship between 2 objects. That's the simple form of business rule that we're starting out here. Actually, the whole concept of business rules are bigger than that. But we're going to start where our biz rules are simply a statement about the relationship
Can
between
you
2 objects.
write on another board your new monitors covering it all?
Okie dokie, thanks. You guys all see this from way back?
Yep.
All right. So, typically, there's a teacher has a 0 or many sections. Couple things about a business rule. There's got to be a better verb than has. Right? Teacher has sections. Jeez. Teacher teaches sections. A teacher is responsible for sections. There's a lot of better verb choices than has. And you should use them. When it comes down to actually telling this to your database engine, however, your database engine really only has a few verbs that it cares about. Has is one of them. Belongs to is another. Has and belongs to. Now, as business analysts, you should probably write much better stuff because it helps us understand. Business rules always come in 2s. In our class, there's always a pair when we ask for business rules. So what's the one that goes along with this one?
The teacher has 1 and only 1 section.
Nope. Looking for something else. Let's see, if we drew a picture of this, and we had teacher here, in the ubiquitous oval that some people call potatoes, this is a potato background, and section, and here. And we drew the relationship relationship between these two things is a line. You know, at this point, I am an artist. I am a business analyst maestro, because this is the extent of your diagramming chops. When you're a business analyst, sometimes squares and lines. If you can master this kind of drawing, you are going to be very successful. So I've got a relationship here. I've got a teacher has sections. Teacher has sections. What's the other way of looking at this?
Section has one too many.
A section, okay, section has teachers, has something, some relationship with teachers. So the convention we have, the other side of the has relationship is belongs to. Now, can a section have more than one teacher? On some cases, yeah. Sometimes there are team teaching situations. In fact, I think in some of our materials you'll see that there's a grading instructor is Taylor Hanna, grading instructor is Sue Norris or something like that. But in this section, there's only one of these. So now you have a choice. Are you going to model this situation as, well, a section has one and only one teacher? Or does a section have one or more teachers?
Well, by section, do you mean CRN or do you mean course title?
CRN, what is the CRN of this class? 15736, something like that?
Well, are you talking teachers or teacher?
Talking how many of us are there?
Well, at this school, there's only one.
Okay? So in our database, for right now, we're just going to decide. In our database, we're going to say there's one teacher. There's just one teacher. So a section belongs to one teacher. Now sometimes we get this even tighter, like a social security number. Who in here is a citizen and has a social security number in this country? Okay, is anyone here a citizen that does not have a social security number? Yep. So citizens have one and only one social security number. If you have two social security numbers, you're breaking the law. Someone made a mistake, or you bought a false ID sometime when you're wasted youth. In any case, a social security number, the relationship between a United States citizen and a social security number is one and only one. Okay, we've gone over some of this before. I don't want to beat this to death. So here on our diagram, we write this as belongs to. And we read it this way. A teacher has a section. A section belongs to a teacher. So you read it one way, and then you read it the other way. Now we're missing something in this diagram.
The ones and crows.
Yeah, we're missing that optionality and cardinality. We've got the entities. I got one entity here, I got one entity here. I've got the relationship, I've named it, and I've represented it on my drawing. Now I've got to show this bit about zero or many, one. Okay, so at this point you're going to have to actually draw upon that amazing artistic ability of yours and draw more lines and circles. This is tough. There's a couple of signs we use. The first one is if there's a teacher has zero or many sections, the zero is just a zero. We draw a zero. And since we're drawing a zero, we're going to put it up on the line. That's zero. Zero or many. Now the way we draw many is we make a little symbol like that. 3 lines. Boop, boop, boop. You call them crow's feet. I had a student once who said, I call them cardinal's feet. It was like, my head exploded. Because I thought, what a great way to remember that these depict cardinality. Yeah. you're laughing, you're like, whoa, the whole universe is opened up to this guy, and I don't really care. No, I'm just kidding. It's true. It was like, wow, the master learns from the student. Boy, do I have a big ego. All right, so this way, what's the important point here? There's a strange notation that you have to memorize. There are 6 things that you have to memorize, and you are responsible for knowing them in your head, regurgitating them on quizzes. The other important thing that many people stumble over, I stumble over it all the time, is for this business rule, which end of the line does it go on? Which end of the line does it go on? The answer to that is just like when you were a little kid and you were learning to read, say it out loud as you read it. A teacher has 0 or many sections. Just work your way across. A teacher has 0 or many sections. So that shows to you that the relationship, cardinality and optionality for this relationship goes on the right side. It goes on the second entity. So let's draw the other one. Let's do this rule. A section belongs to one teacher. A section belongs to one teacher. It's just a 1. And just throw it on the end of the line. So now we've got 3 symbols we can use. We've got a 0, we've got 1, we've got many. Those are my 3 numbers. I'm a database analyst. I don't need any more numbers than that. You can combine them. So if I have an entity and it's this, it means 1 and only 1. If I have an entity and I have a relationship that ends like this, I'm drawing a hole here, and it looks like this, what does that mean?
1 to many.
1 or many. Not 1 too many, 1 or many. It's a little different thing. If I have an entity and it has this, what does it mean? 0 or 1. It's really pretty simple. What's weird is the first time you see it, nobody ever told you the key. But now you've got the secret decoder ring and you know exactly what's going on. Now there's some that don't make sense. Like this doesn't make sense. You can't have 1 and only 1 and also have 0. By 1 and only 1 means there has to be 1 and it must exist. So this does not make sense at all. So what other combinations are there? There aren't many other combinations.
Many to many.
So there are some where you don't specify anything more than you just say, well, this has many. Well, that kind of implies that there has to be 1. There can't be 0. It also, what does it say about, can I have 1 of these things? Yeah, you can have 1 thing there. 1 is a subset of 1. So having the difference between saying 1 and many isn't very clear. It's kind of fuzzy. Also, there's a form of this notation where you have an entity and it just connects. What that means is, well, they didn't say. We don't know yet what the optionality and the cardinality is. It's pretty likely it's not optional. You know, a teacher has a class, okay? Do we know how many classes that teacher can have? No, not right now. We don't know yet. So a lot of times, the reason that these diagrams exist is really for drawing on whiteboards. It's really for drawing on whiteboards. Because when you're talking to a customer, when you're talking to a client, you're asking, well, how many of those are there? How does that work? They'll tell you. And you start out with what you know. Well, I know that there's a relationship between these 2 things. I don't know much more about it, but I can draw them both on the board, and I can connect them, and my client looks at it and goes, yeah, that's pretty good. And then you go forward. You iterate. You repeat yourself and go over the same material, and each time you go over it, it gets better. That's, we'll talk about the iterative process later, but it happens all the time. Very rarely do you get something right the first time. Very rarely. If you do, something's not right. Okay, so we're gonna stop there. These are called, yeah, anyone know what this diagramming notation is called?
ERD.
ERD. ERD. ERD. ERD. What does ERD stand for?
Entity relation diagram.
Entity relationship diagram. There are lots of different standards for entity relationship diagrams. Hey, would you make sure this gets passed around one more time? Make sure everybody gets signed on? I think, got another person back there in this hand. There's different ways of writing entity relationship diagrams. You'll see two of them in this class. There's another one where instead of an oval, they have a rectangle, they have the name of the entity here, and then they have the attributes listed down here. That's my favorite. This is related to UML notation of objects and classes, which is kind of cool. But in this class, we're just looking for ovals. In your homework, what I'm looking for is I want you to draw or to type the relationship, the words, above the line. In some entity relationship diagram notations, they actually make a box here for this, a diamond. And you can tell a lot more about how the entity relationship works. Let me erase this. Another kind of form of entity relationship diagram you will run into, it's more modern than the one we show you. It has the squares with the name of the entity and the attribute here. This is attribute, attribute, name, attribute, attribute, attribute. Some database analysts really want to get more specific than this 0 or many. They want to know just how many of these am I allowed. Remember I said as a part-time instructor, I'm allowed to teach 2 sections. I have to get my boss's override to teach a 3rd section. And it has to do with union rules. You know, when there are more than 25 of us in this classroom for some reason, everything changes. So that number 2 is meaningful. That number 3 is a limit. I can't have 4 sections. There's no way of showing that in this notation. So somewhere in my database structure, somewhere I have to record that. Now when I'm using these kind of business rules, I've got to find some other place to do it. And that looks fine for me. But there are some people who say, well, let's put that on the ERD. So they actually have a different kind of optionality and cardinality. They put 0 dot dot is equal. And they actually write down the numbers. And if it's many, they say 0 dot dot star. Don't worry about this, don't bother writing it down. That's not what we do in this class. But whenever you see something in this class, an introductory class, and you say, well, yeah, that's all good, but it doesn't answer the whole question. It's not good enough. I mean, there are these other situations. Don't you want to deal with that? Well, yeah, we do. And somewhere, someone has come up with a better way of modeling this. There's a new language, not really new, it's about 2 decades old now, called the Universal Modeling Language. Kind of a presumptuous title, if you ask me. The Universal Modeling Language. There are 20 different diagram types in UML. It covers everything. There's no entity relationship diagram in UML. So I've worked in companies where they said everything must be UML. And you kind of shoehorn databases into class diagrams. So, you are going to walk into a job, and they're going to say, can you diagram this database schema for me? And you're going to say, sure. Do you have a standard for how you write your diagrams? And some companies will say, yeah, we do. Here's our ERD standard. You look at it, and you start diagramming your databases the way they do. You know, when in Rome, diagram like a Roman. don't, then you could always go back to this. This has been in use since, I think, before I was born. And everybody understands it. And anybody who's worked in databases. So, any questions? You guys have to come up with a bunch of business rules for your assignment. You have to diagram them. I'm going to check your business rules, and I'm going to see if they make sense to me. Now, sometimes what makes sense to you doesn't make sense to me, and they're both valid. They're both equally good at slicing the data up and making sense of it. Sometimes what you think is valid is just wrong. Sorry, that's the way it goes. We'll have a conversation around that, provided you get your material in on time. When I look at your business, your diagrams, all I'm going to check is to make sure that they match your rules. If you say one on your rule and you say one and only one on your diagram, bang, no points for you. Now what happens is sometimes you write the business rule and you start diagramming and you think, well, how does that, what's the symbol? And you go, oh, okay. And you learn more by diagramming it. And your diagram is right. Your diagram is a better answer than your business rule. What you've got to do then is you've got to go back and fix your business rule. Documentation sets have to be consistent. You write stuff and it's a journey of learning and exploration. And the documentation set gets out of whack. Some parts of it's are right, some are wrong. You have to make them all right. Yes, sir?
Now, in your rule for sections, sections belong to one teacher. Why wouldn't you say one and only one teacher?
It may be that that's the case.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, why wouldn't you right now, considering you're the only teacher in the school that teaches that? So wouldn't it be one-to-one?
Because at this moment, all I know is that there's one of me.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a rule somewhere that says there can only be one of me. There can be only one.
Okay. So,
No.
okay, that makes more sense.
Yes, sir.
When you say diagram, you're talking about what we do in Visio, right?
Say this again.
You're talking about what we put in Visio? Or do you want us to act?
You can use Visio, but let me caveat that in a second.
Okay.
Yes.
Capitalization, all caps when we're writing these rules, or mixed case, is there rules on that?
There is no rule for how you write this stuff. I believe your assignment has a naming convention for entities. It may or may not. It certainly has a naming convention for tables. We'll talk about tables in the second half of today's class, when we talk about schemas. Good point, though. There are always naming conventions. Names are important. Names are magical. When you walk into a shop, they're going to have a naming convention. If they don't, they should. And you got to be the guy who says, what's your naming convention? And if they say, oh, well, we kind of do this, we kind of do that, you say, well, write it down and I'll follow it. Or I'll write it down and then we'll all follow it. If you work in some frameworks, it's required. Like in Ruby on Rails, classes are named with initial caps and lowercase. Tables are named a certain way. Instance variables that carry things are used with snake case. You have to program it that way or it doesn't work. So your assignment has a naming convention in it. I don't remember what it is. You got to follow it. I'll make sure I know what it is before I start grading. Now back to Visio. The best thing for you to do right now is just a drawing program that can do ovals, lines, and text. Glyphy is good enough. Glyphy is your alternative in your assignment. It's an online diagramming tool. It's free. It doesn't do much more than give you lines and diagrams. Now, Glyphy and Visio will give you the option when you draw a line, you can set the end types. So if you've ever done any kind of diagramming, usually you draw a line and then you've got some sort of dialog box that says, what kind of endings do you want? You can choose. You can say, I want arrows or I want filled in arrows. It makes things real easy for you. And in most diagramming tools, you can have a line and one of the options of the end type is, you know, our little cardinal speed. That's good. That saves you time. Try not to just actually draw circles and put them on there. That's too much work. Liffey and Visio will do that for you. Now, the problem with Visio is part of a really, really cool tool set. It's part of Office. And Office has a really, really good integration with Visual Studio. And Visual Studio has a really good integration with SQL Server, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Microsoft has set it up so that if you tell Visio and Visual Studio and SQL Server, I'm building a database, then you can use Visual Studio and you can use this diagramming notation, and it will set up your relationships for you, and at some point in the future, it will spit out a SQL for you. It's really cool. The problem is, that's like trying to paint a picture with a dog's tail while it's still attached to the dog. There's just way too much tool there. So if you use Visio, I wouldn't tell it I'm doing an entity relationship diagram.
No.
Because when it does, it starts using all of this other functionality that we don't need. So Visio can actually be way too much tool for the job. Yes, sir?
I'm sorry, how do you spell Liffey?
Gliffy is Gliffy. It's in your syllabus and it's in your assignment. There's others out there. Diagramming is a really common thing. Get good at diagramming. Get good at drawing pictures. And there's two things about diagramming. One is get good at doing it on a whiteboard. Or on a piece of paper. When you're talking to someone, draw pictures all the time. There's nothing like a picture to help people understand each other. Even if it's just potatoes and lines. The second kind of diagramming notation is the formal kind that you see in government specs and NASA documents. And that's what UML was designed for. Where the diagram is so good and so specific that, like Visio, you can actually code straight from the diagram. In fact, it's so specific that you can turn it over to a piece of software, and the software can code from the diagram. Frankly, most shops don't work like that. Most shops, and in fact, if you're an advocate of what is that thing called? Agile process. If you're an advocate of agile process, the diagram is only as good as the conversation, only as good as your understanding. What really counts is the code. And you get to the code as quickly as possible, and you throw the diagrams away. It doesn't mean you can be sloppy. It doesn't mean you can draw a diagram that's wrong. But it means the diagram is only a means to an end. So that's why I say don't get too worked up about Visio's wonderful, cool features about translating ERDs into SQL and all the other stuff that it will do for you. Okay, let's take a break. And then we'll talk about how to transform these entities and these attributes into something that a database understands. Something mechanical that you can actually plug into a database engine. So, 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Hi.
Just looking for a book.
Okay. So I'll see you at 4 minutes.
I don't.
Yeah,
It's
this
not-
is two different examples in here.
For SOFA? Yeah.
They've got some fall calculators,
Really, just give me.
and then if you look at the table, first letter,
I'm looking at some of the stuff that I didn't
the first letter is first name. First name is kind of, so,
Yeah, there are conventions for the still,
but
it doesn't say how to do it. Yeah, sure goes. He's got a library.
it gives us 3 hints. Yeah, like hint 1 is a foreign key should only be, it should only be the
Oh, all of
table
the stuff that's on.
that is on the many side,
Yes.
too many. Person is many.
The thing that says that.
And many of the
Especially if you
companies,
didn't take my
companies,
time.
right, and then,
So it's quite a lot of stuff.
tells you to look at the business rules,
But
and the ED,
focus on
ERTs,
consent, especially when you're trying to cut through and figure out ways.
many. Yeah. Which table is the only table that has an any-side relationship, this is the only table that has properties in it. And hit number two, your tricky one.
Okay, I can definitely.
Although, at some
Hit
point,
number
when
two
they said,
says,
you'll start
think about the
listening
fields,
out
the only field that should be
Take this
duplicated.
HTML and
There's only two keys.
Yes, yes.
I did just.
So, there's two fields that can be duplicated.
Just get files and all that.
Data that applies to a family should be a family, data that applies to a person should be a person.
Instructions in the materials.
And then the third one is the primary key should not be made from any of the data fields in the table
Now
one.
you get free access.
Primary key and foreign key should have a different name, but not related, associated.
Yeah, just put Brian.
And you take out
Yeah, but you can't get
primary keys, and you take
Right,
personalized.
that, in your office, there's another place in the PCC where you can get Microsoft Office to 2010. Yeah, it's one of the neat things about working here or being a student here is you get a lot.
So it all sounds like about $60. Nah, the table's just okay. Yeah, you can download all that software. You can download all that software like Microsoft Office with all.
Yeah, there's like a link on that instruction.
Yeah, and then you just go and put your username and password if you haven't created one, so log in and sign, you can download all Microsoft, you can set operating systems for free. You can do a digital download, like, no expiration date for a price, like they sell Microsoft Office Pro with no expiration date, it's like if you're buying it, then there's a date.
Yeah, I know because you can't.
Yeah, I didn't, use because IT,
Oh, yeah.
because then it's his IT.
So what I would do probably
Yeah,
is to
I tried that, but
And
Microsoft.
then they'll come and
Cool.
it may be, since this seems to be a pattern of you, you did a table and the guys at the IT. Because there are PhD classes, so they've got to be a local PhD person gets it right. I just have never had someone want to do this class on this everywhere.
I can't, like, I looked at the code that was there, and it was about three, so like,
Deadline.
the table, all of this, and I've never looked at systems on, like, that directly, so move that up there, and then I finally got the validation as HTML5. So it'll do that, but the validator that W3 has is experimental, it's based on another one, so I went to the other one instead, and that was telling me, like, the for X HTML.
The PHP is gonna help you do all this faster?
It's going to script it so that based on what response it receives from the browser,
Uh-huh.
it'll choose to either write